Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back. Another podcast, another topic. And I'm talking about Dungeons and Dragons today. I'm talking about combat. Is it slow? Is it fast? We're going to rip it apart. I have prepared a lot of material. I'm going to say right now that this is not like anything you've probably seen before. Nothing is sacred as far as I'm concerned. I am going to go after everything, okay? I'm going to put up a poll. Feel free to take part in that poll. My suggestion to you is grab some food and drink. Make sure you're comfortable because I've got a lot to say. And I hope that some of this will be useful to you and some of this will be at least enlightening in some way. And I am not targeting any particular version of Dungeons and Dragons necessarily. Anyway, let's go after this. Let's talk about this topic. Hi, welcome to How to RPG. My name is Fred Weller, and today I want to talk about why is Dungeons and Dragons combat slow? Or is it slow? Is it fast? Is it quick? Is there something wrong with it? Is there something we can do about it? So I wanted to really look at this at a lot of different levels, not just one. What I've decided to do is to really go down to the nuts and bolts and just rip it apart to give you a really good idea about what are the things you might be dealing with. And the things that I think you're dealing with are really setting up the game. Things like rolling dice, definitely combat rules. We definitely got to look at player behavior and dungeon master behavior. Now, I want to make it clear, when I talk about player behavior and dungeon master behavior, they are actually the smallest component of this. Would you believe it? They are the smallest component of the whole process. So why is Dungeons and Dragons combat slow? Now, that is a leading statement. I'll make it clear now. You know it's a leading statement. I know it's a leading statement. What I want to really say is the following, that everyone's perspective of what slow Dungeons and Dragons combat is likely to be very different. So you might be fine with the speed at which your battles are taking place. Okay. And if that's the case, then this will not help you anyway. That's good. That's good. I'm glad. Now, the different factors that I will mention about why Dungeons and Dragons combat is slow, they might have a small effect on the game. They might have a greater effect on the game. But what I don't want you to do, don't fixate on one or two things. This tends to be what people do, is they'll fixate on one or two things. You need to consider the whole package. If you consider everything put together, it makes more sense. There is not like one thing that affects the slowness of combat in Dungeons and Dragons. So you have to take the whole package, not just one or two things, okay? It's not that simple. Now, not everything that slows down Dungeons and Dragons combat can be controlled by the players who play the characters, or even by the dungeon master. There are certain things that are hard baked into Dungeons and Dragons that are kind of outside of the control of the people playing the game. And of course, there are some provisos, because I know people are going to say, but Fred, the players and the dungeon master, they play the game. They can play the game however they like. And that is true. But you wouldn't know that, and you wouldn't understand how to do that unless you've done that for some time. If you are new coming into something like D&D, you would not know. You would just assume that the most sensible way to do something, the fastest way to do something, has been laid out in a book that you purchased on the game. Okay? So that's what I wanted to say first, just to make it clear to people. So setting up the game. I think probably setting up the game is the thing that almost always I find is definitely a drag on time. So setting up things like miniatures and maps and terrain, this takes time for a dungeon master to do, okay? A great solution, of course, is sometimes, not always, but sometimes you can just use a pre-made physical map or a pre-made digital map if you're using digital resources or maps. You can use that. It can certainly help, but it won't be able to be used every single time. Otherwise, like drawing the map out in advance can certainly help, by simplifying and drawing it more quickly, that will certainly assist you. Quite often you don't have to draw that much out in terms of line work to give an idea to players about position and what's going on. So, simplify your images, don't get too fussy. Now, just moving tokens around or miniatures around on a physical map or a digital map, that increases the time to complete a combat, compared to something like Theatre of the Mind, where everybody at the table imagines what's taking place. I'm going to also say that, if you want to solve part of that problem around the moving of tokens and miniatures, if the players and the Dungeon Master can move their own monsters and characters freely, you'll usually find this is the best solution because they can move them quite quickly. And even if the player doesn't move their token or miniature quickly, then the Dungeon Master can step in and do that. Okay. Again, if you insist on using maps, tokens, and miniatures, okay, then getting everybody access. Doing this physically in person is probably the best way, in my opinion. But you can also do that on a digital virtual tabletop. Also, things like a large group of people will always, if you have a large group of people playing Dungeons and Dragons, that will always slow down combat, because the more people taking their turn, the longer it takes. It's just logical. So a simple solution, a logical solution, is to play with smaller groups of people. Okay? Instead of playing with a group of 10, you play with a group of 5. Instead of playing with 7 people, you play with 5 people. You shrink down the group size, and that will certainly help. Now, that's not always an option to you. Sometimes you have no choice. If you're running something like Dungeons and Dragons Adventurers League and the table sizes are stipulated as being up to 7, you might have to just run a table of 7 people. There's not much more you can do about that. Anyway, Theatre of the Mind. I think Theatre of the Mind is misunderstood. But one of the things about Theatre of the Mind is it requires less time to actually set up. I know you're saying, but you have to describe more information with Theatre of the Mind compared to laying out a map. To a certain degree, that's true, but not really. In practice, theoretically, that's true, but in practice, it's not. Okay? Particularly with a group of people who've been playing with each other for a while, they'll get a basic gist of what's going on. Often, it only requires 1 or 2 sentences to actually lay the scene for what's going on during a battle. So it not only speeds up, Theatre of the Mind not only speeds up the setup time, okay, and that's a fact, it also speeds up everything during the turns. The only time I think it's a problem is when players can't imagine the battle scene. And this might happen because the environment is really complicated with lots of things that they can interact with, or the battle consists of a lot of combatants. In other words, there's a lot of monsters or enemies on the battlefield along with the player characters that they have to interact with. And so then suddenly position becomes much more difficult for everybody to imagine. If you're dealing with 1 or 2 monsters or combatants, it's significantly easier. It's a much easier situation to deal with, in my opinion. And then the reality too with Theatre of the Mind, over using maps, miniatures, and doing it that way, doing the physical representation, is also some area effect spells are difficult to apply to Theatre of the Mind. It doesn't matter how good you are at it. There are some spells that are just the way they are shaped. A cylinder shape is difficult. A line is easy. A cone sounds difficult, but it's actually pretty easy. A cube, not so bad, okay? If you're dealing with large spheres, okay, or large radius, that can be difficult because you've got to determine what is actually in the area of the effect. So when it comes to Theatre of the Mind, you'll find that some spells that have an area effect, the players will struggle to be able to envisage what's taking place because they don't know how to position it. I have this in my own home group. We have a player who really struggles with doing that. They're trying to figure out how to position their spell for the maximum amount of effect. And if you don't trust your Dungeon Master to position the spells for you in Theatre of the Mind for optimal carnage, then you're going to wind up taking more time rather than less time. In circumstances like that, you might find that theatre of the mind will not result in a better result for you because there's too much going on, and using maps and tokens or maps and miniatures is going to be a better idea. So there is a place for both of them. Personally, myself, I use both methods, and I select the method that I think is going to reduce the amount of work and brain power for everybody, and is going to be the fastest approach. You don't have to do it that way. You do whatever you want to do. I'm just pointing out what will slow things down. Okay, now that we've talked about sort of setup, we need to also talk about things like rolling dice. Why am I saying that? Because rolling dice takes time. Whether you like it or not, the rolling of a dice, the reading of the number, and all the other things that go with it have an effect. So having to roll a dice mechanic to make an attack to hit something, to roll for damage, to roll for any kind of spell, activation or whatever, some sort of saving throw, an ability check, a skill check, this will always slow down the game, okay? The important question is how many of the dice rolls are absolutely necessary for Dungeons and Dragons combat that are actually important to the game, and also to ensure that it is fun. Are there some dice rolls that are unnecessary? This is a strange discussion, but here we go. So rolling to hit an opponent before doing damage will often result in a lot of missing blows. So a blow that doesn't actually reduce hit points. Now, this is not something that you can control as a player and a dungeon master. You don't really have control over what the dice will roll, okay? So if you miss, it's not your fault. So you do not need to apologize. But the reality is every time you miss, it extends the battle's time period, particularly at low level when what you're rolling, okay, is essentially a 20-sided dice and adding a number to it. And at low levels, the number you add to that 20-sided dice to make your overall result bigger, okay, is going to be quite small. And you really want to have a larger number to add to your 20-sided dice so that you don't have to miss quite so much or fail on a check or something like that. But let's just go back to rolling to hit, because that's really what I want to focus on. It's really strange that our game operates this way. Dungeons and Dragons, it's strange considering that hit points, okay, that resource is an abstraction. Hit points are an abstraction. They don't actually represent just physical health, okay? I know somebody's going to say, but Fred, they say damage. When you roll to hit, they said damage. Damage means you're doing physical injuries. No, they're only using the word damage. Again, damage is an abstraction. Okay, in the game of Dungeons and Dragons, just like hit points being an abstraction, okay, and a representation of something else, the word damage is an abstraction to mean something that reduces hit points. That's all it means. And rather than saying this reduces hit points, too many words, they've narrowed it down to one term, damage. Okay, that's it. That's all it is. It's just maybe your understanding of what that means in the game. So what do hit points actually represent? Well, they represent luck. They represent mental resilience. They can represent your skill. As you get higher in skill, you have more hit points. Your skill, you're better at dealing with stuff. It can represent stamina and fatigue. So the more that you fight, it actually makes sense that you would be losing hit points the longer the fight goes, because you're running out of puff. You're getting tired. These are things that are supposed to be represented by hit points, yet we have an attack roll to hit. So what am I saying? Am I saying we need to get rid of the roll to hit? There's a problem with getting rid of the roll to hit in Dungeons and Dragons. Although that would be quite useful, considering hit points is an abstraction and the word damage is an abstraction as well. The problem is that removing the roll to hit right now is difficult because there are different probabilities connected to your player character and the monsters. Okay, so just rolling the damage and not rolling to hit, or rolling damage or rolling to lose hit points, because it's not necessarily physical injuries you're taking, it's fatigue, stamina, skill, mental resilience, luck. Okay, you'd have to change the whole game, would need a complete redesign to make that work for Dungeons and Dragons right now. Doesn't matter what version of the game you'd be playing. You could be playing basic, you could be playing advanced, 3, 4, 5, doesn't matter. Okay, rolling initiative, rolling individual initiative in particular. Rolling individual initiative to determine the turn order in combat generally requires between 5 or more people to roll dice. That is including the Dungeon Master. Then once they've rolled their 20-sided dice, they have to add a initiative bonus to it, a number to that, to determine, what their initiative is. Then they tell the Dungeon Master, who then places everybody into order from highest to lowest. This takes time, and the battle really hasn't even started. It's like a whole round of activity that takes place just to determine who's going to go first and who's going to go last. So it's slow just to begin in terms of a battle or combat. That's individual initiative. If you roll initiative for every combat, every different combat that you have, that adds a lot of time to combats over the whole game session. Is it really necessary to roll a new initiative for your order every battle? I want to ask you that question. I want you to think about this. Are you doing it just because traditionally that was what you were taught to do, and that's what people have been telling you on the internet? Maybe, but you really need to be connected to that in some way. Is it actually going to be useful to you? Why can't players do it once for the whole game session? You never have to re-roll it. That means that once you've rolled it, you just stick with the same initiative order. Just stay where it is for that game session. That would eliminate a lot of additional rolls. If you're having 2 or 3 battles or more in your game session, you've just saved yourself like a whole round every single battle, because rolling initiative is like a round of combat, essentially. Why not use just a static value to set the order of play through a battle? Why not, instead of rolling the dice and then having to add that number to an initiative number, why not just use a static value? Maybe that will be your initiative bonus, and you just put it into order. And when the monsters need to go, you just slip in very quickly. Dungeon Master just slips in their number, and whoever's got if you've got a number that's identical, people who are identical could go in any order. Doesn't matter. They go at the same time. If you need to break the tie between a Dungeon Master and the player, well, just let the Dungeon Master go first. They might as well. They've probably got less things to control than everybody else. Or have a roll-off if you really must. Have some sort of resolution that's quick. Do you know what I mean? Next, single turn-based combat. So when you have a single turn-based combat, it will always be slow. Particularly because it is single turn. Everybody will have to wait for people to complete their turn before having their own turn. That will always slow down the game, which is why simultaneous group turn orders can speed up play and reduce that waiting time, speed up the combat time period. Okay, so you wind up getting through it a lot quicker. Now, what is that? Well, this is where you simply have a roll-off between your Dungeon Master and one of the players, and whoever gets the higher number is the one that goes first. So all the players, if you get a higher number, if the one person rolling the 6-sided dice, you just select one person. You don't add anything to it. You roll that dice. You get a high number, players go first. If the Dungeon Master gets a high number, the monsters go first. Simple as that. And you don't have to keep redoing that every single round. I suppose you could, but it's certainly a lot simpler than having individual turn order. Now, one of the great things about that is when you have a group simultaneous turn order, it means that whoever's ready to go within the players just does their thing. And those people are still thinking where you would have to wait for them to decide what they're going to do, and then for them to roll their dice and then tell you that whatever numbers they've rolled, they'll wind up going last because they're going to take a little bit longer. They'll still get their turn. It just means those people are more prepared and have got everything worked out sooner. They'll get to take their turn first. But ultimately, it's not going to disadvantage the group as a whole. Certainly if you compare it between Dungeon Master and player. Now, giving monsters individual initiative rolls, I'm not a fan of it, but I know some people do give all the monsters an individual initiative roll, and this extends the time it takes for a Dungeon Master to complete their turn. It's not just about players, it's about the Dungeon Master as well, and the dice they're rolling. So a simple fix for this is for the Game Master to roll one initiative for all the monsters, or roll one initiative for the same type of monsters, and they all act. All the goblins go on whatever initiative, 15. All the goblins that have gone, okay, well, when we get to the orcs, if there's orcs there, they're going to go on initiative 10. So rolling once for a group, okay? That would certainly help assist you. Individual initiative for every single monster and having to label every single token and every single miniature really is a time-consuming process. I understand the rationale behind this. It means that if there is, if the Dungeon Master gets to go first, then the monsters won't wipe the floor with the players. I understand where it's coming from. But I've played basic D&D, and I've played 5e, and I've played 3e, 4e, Pathfinder, and I can assure you that you don't get wiped. The floor, you don't get wiped. It just doesn't happen. You're usually fine. Okay? It'd be very rare for there to be a situation where the dice are against you so much that there's nothing you can do about it. Anyway, let's keep going. Dungeon Master's not using average damage. Okay, when a monster inflicts any kind of damage, when they are deducting hit points from player characters, if you are not using average damage and you're rolling, you significantly slow down the game because there are so many combatants for one person to control. Unless you're using a solo monster where there's just one monster to control, okay? But if you have 5, 6, 7, or 12 different creatures or monsters to control, you're dealing with damage for every single one. So if you roll individual damage for every single monster, that takes time. Even if you roll your damage and your to hit dice at the same time, it's still going to take a lot more time than just using average damage. I know a lot of people don't like this and they think, well, but it means that they're always doing on average the same amount of damage. And that means the players can metagame and determine that, well, I don't need to worry about the situation. If you get a critical hit, I'm don't want to use average damage. You can find, for a critical hit, just roll the dice in that situation if you feel you must. Okay? What I tend to do is I get a 6-sided dice and I just add that 6-sided dice to the average damage. And I can differentiate the monsters' hit points that they do by just an increase of, on average, 3. Sometimes it'll be 6, sometimes it'll be 3. But that's more because my group are hard asses and power gamers and they need a harder game. Otherwise, they just could not cope. And it's easy for me it's easy for me to add 1 to 6 to whatever the average damage is because it's a quick calculation in my brain. It's a quick calculation. If it's not a quick calculation for you, don't do that. Next is when you add and subtract numerical values to a dice roll, okay, which will of course get worse if you have multiple numbers to deal with, it is always going to slow down the battle. So if you have to roll the dice, then you add your attack bonus, whatever that might be, that's been calculated in advance. And then if you've got +1s and +2s and -1s and -2s or -5s that you have to also apply to your dice roll for whatever it might be, whether it's an attack or anything else, doesn't matter. That's another mental piece of gymnastics you have to perform in terms of calculating. Now, if you're really good at maths and you can do that really fast, even the best mathematicians that I've seen will struggle doing this particularly quickly. And It's not like everybody who plays Dungeons and Dragons can do maths really fast. And as the numbers get bigger and there are more of them, it still extends the time out. This is why things like the advantage mechanic, where you roll 2 dice, okay, and you take the highest number. Okay, that's not a mental piece of gymnastics you're dealing with there. You just need to decide, whatever number is the higher number, that's the one I take off the dice if I have advantage, if I need to have a benefit. If I have a disadvantage, okay, well, that's a penalty of some kind. I roll 2 dice, I just select the lowest number and add that to whatever my number is. That's good. Even re-roll mechanics they're a really quick substitute for getting rid of the +1, +2, +5, +10, -1, -2, -3, -4, 5, whatever things that you might be dealing. Numerical values that you have to add, additional numerical values you have to add to a dice roll. Okay, now I'm going to have a lot to say about this a little bit, but let me just spell this out. Not rolling your hit dice and your damage dice at the same time, okay, is going to slow down the battle, because it all adds up. When everybody at the table is not rolling their 2 hit dice and their damage dice at the same time, that means that all the characters' turns are slower, and frankly, even the Dungeon Master's turn is slower. But you shouldn't be rolling as a Dungeon Master damage dice. You should be using average damage, like I suggested. That will certainly help. What you do, though, is if you have 6 monsters, you should have 6 20-sided dice, and you roll all their attacks all at once. If you have 10 monsters, have 10 20-sided dice, so you can roll all the attacks all at once. And then you're just using average damage from there. That will certainly assist in speeding up your gameplay. If you're a player and you're level 1, normally, even in D&D 5e, you've only got 1 attack and then damage dice. Okay. Here's the problem. Even at level 1, you can 2-weapon fight. That means you have 2 attacks. That's 2 lots of damage to deal with. And that's at level 1. At level 5, martial characters in Dungeons & Dragons 5e, and not all versions of D&D, but even 4e and 3.5 and version 3, there were situations that would crop up where you got more than 1 attack. So suddenly, from about level 5 onward, particularly for modern D&D, because extra attack, okay, multiple attacks tend to kick in around level 5, level 6, you're rolling a lot of dice. Can you imagine how many dice you're rolling if you get to level 20? I've played to level 20. I know what it's like. You literally have a cup full of dice if you're a martial character. If you are a spellcaster and you're casting Fireball, why do you not have at least 8 6-sided dice that you can roll all at once? Okay? So that's one of the things I wanted to say. Now, I want to also spell out that there is a practice that I recommend that you engage in. When you don't roll multiple sets of different colored dice to represent each of your different attacks and your different damage rolls, if you're using damage as a player character, okay, you roll that all at once. Now, what used to happen is when a player would get multiple attacks, okay, you want to be able to roll all the dice all at once, and you want to roll all the damage dice all at once, because there's going to be at least 3, 4, 5 attacks. And so what would happen with players that I played with, even in game stores, but that also happens in my home game, is they buy different coloured dice sets. And so what they do is they have their first attack might be red dice. So they've got damage dice that are red. They've got attack dice that are, to roll to hit is red as well. Then their second attack might be green dice. And the green damage dice, they've got them. They know exactly what they are. They've also got green dice for their attack roll. If they've got a third attack, they've got blue dice for that. And you put all the dice, it's already sitting in a cup, ready to go. You roll it into a tray or onto the table, and you add everything up very, very quickly. Because every time you have to pick up dice and roll again, you're taking more time. That's just one person. It happens very quickly in Dungeons & Dragons, where a player will be rolling more than 1 attack. Now, unfortunately, it still requires people to do mathematics, that mental gymnastics, okay, to add up all the numbers, whether it be attacks or damage. This is why I am a strong believer in the automatic dice roller. They exist. Why don't we use them? Not using an automatic dice roller beyond level 10 when you're playing a character, or even sooner in many cases, when you have so many dice to roll and so much mental mathematics to do, it's kind of foolish. Particularly when bots and apps are designed to do this randomly and be fair. They can add up all the dice, they can add your modifiers and bonuses, they can apply penalties, you can pre-program everything. Now this is great on a virtual tabletop because you just press the button and it does it all for you. But you can do these, you can have this on your phone if you're playing in person. One of the criteria that I have personally in my group is I insist that beyond level 10, they have to use a dice roller, not for their attacks. I'm happy for them to roll separate attacks for their attack. Okay, that's great. That's fine. All good with that. Don't mind. But if they have more than one attack, they better have more than one 20-sided dice. What I do want them to be doing beyond level 10 is I want them to be using automatic dice rollers, because even though the people who play in my game are pretty good at doing their mathematics and adding things up fast, it is going to get much more difficult the higher we are in level. Level 10 and upward, there are so many dice being rolled. And this is definitely showing up in our games right now. We were level 10 last week, but now level 11. And by the time we're finished, we'll probably be level 15 or 16. So there's a lot more dice yet to come. Okay, use it. It's there. They are not cheating. Okay, you're not taking away from the game by using a bot to roll your damage. So when it comes to rolling damage, definitely use dice rollers. And if you've got more than one attack, buy a few extra 20-sided dice so you can roll all 3 attacks all at once. And then you just press the button to do your damage for the first one. You call it out. It'll add it all up for you. Press it again for the second one if you hit with the second attack. And press it again for the third one if the third attack hit as well. And you can get that turn done so much faster. Now, I have heard some very, very popular and famous YouTubers and internet personalities say that rolling to hit and damage at the same time is a complete waste of time and ridiculous in terms of speeding up combat. And I know why they're saying this. And I know who it is. And I watched one of their videos, and the first thing that I noticed is there are some people who say do it because it will speed up combat, and there is a couple of people who say no, it doesn't have any effect. One of the reasons is they're quite young, so they haven't played that much Dungeons and Dragons. They clearly have played in very small groups, so they don't fully get the effect of what happens over a long period of time. And they haven't played to very high level. So they're probably only playing from level 1 to 5 or 6, maybe as high as level 10, and they stop. So they really don't understand the full effect. Okay? Otherwise, what is happening is maybe when people are rolling their damage and their attack dice, even though they did it at the same time, they're fucking around and wasting time and getting on with things. So I can see where some of our personalities may not understand this, but this is really not about their understanding. It's really about their inexperience. Okay, clearly they're doing something wrong if they haven't figured out that is a faster method. Because I can assure you it definitely is a faster method, and automatic dice rollers work really good for speeding that up. Okay, next, combat rules. Oh my, there's a lot here. Complex rules for both the core rules for Dungeons and Dragons, doesn't matter what version, it could be 5, 4, 3.5, version 3, AD&D. Basic is not really that complicated, but there are a few things that are a little bit messy, and even in basic in terms of the core rules. Having complex rules for that, having a complex monster stat block, the version 3 stat block, so D&D version 3 and 3.5, their stat blocks were horrendous. 4E were really big, but at least they try to put everything in there. 5E can also run into problems. Some of those stat blocks are just massive and complicated, but at least everything is there. The worst time is when you have feats attached to monsters that you have to go and look up or memorize, and that was version 3 in Pathfinder, where they would literally have, there is a monster with the lightning reflex feat, and unless you know what lightning reflex does, you can't figure it out from the stat block. You have to have gone and looked it up or know and remember what it is. So there's a problem. Complex stat blocks for monsters and NPCs, not a great help. Plus all of the player character options that you get. The more complicated, the more there are to run your character, the more difficult it is to run fast combat. It will reduce how quickly your battle will be completed. This is simply a fact. It's just how it is, okay? Now, modern D&D suffers from a lot of this. There's a lot of that going on in version 5, 4, and 3 in Pathfinder, okay? AD&D had some of that as well, frankly. Basic D&D, a little less, but to be fair, basic D&D has, at its core, 4 different dice mechanics that are quite significantly different. That is not hugely helpful. Back me, basic D&D has 4 different mechanics. Why do that to somebody? Keep it really simple and it'll flow a lot faster. It doesn't add that much to the game by making complex rules. Next, magic mechanics and spell mechanics. Spell explanation text being way too long or confusing or complicated is an issue. That will slow everything down. The outcome is that everyone needs more time to apply magic and spells to the field of battle, whether that's to adjudicate it or understand it or describe it or explain it to somebody else. As soon as you do that, and if you include on top of that a dice mechanic into the spell as well, you have included another complication that's more work than really maybe needed to have take place. Okay, spells, particularly in modern D&D, version 3 upward, it's like that. They are really, really crunchy. Now, players who do not know how their character ability works. When a player doesn't know how their character's abilities work, or when the dungeon master who doesn't understand how the monster stat block mechanics work, okay, will slow down the game. And the reason being, in many respects, is back to what I just said, because there's way too much to remember, because the explanations for how these things work for the player and the dungeon master are a bit long-winded and way too complicated. They're hard to comprehend because they haven't been written out very well. Or there's just so much complexity to them, it slows everything down. So in this case, I'm not saying that players or dungeon masters are the ones at fault. What I'm saying is what is at fault is the way that it has been presented to a dungeon master to try to adjudicate. Is it practical to put it into place and make it quick? Quite often it's not. Have the characters, when the players pick up their character and they've built their character, is the character they're playing practical and easy to run fast, or is it built in that it's going to be a slow process? There is a 3 action economy in modern Dungeons and Dragons, which makes everybody's turn take more time. So Dungeons and Dragons version 3 right through to 5 all do this, okay? 3 action economy. Even Pathfinder, 1st edition and 2nd edition, has the 3 action economy, which essentially is you move, you do some sort of action, and then you have some sort of minor, swift, or bonus action thing going on, okay? And with Pathfinder, you have 3 actions, and you just divvy up and use up your 3 actions based off the things you want to try to do. It's all sort of laid out for you. Early Dungeons and Dragons combat played fast. Do you know why? Because it was a 2 action economy. I've said this before. Going from a 2 action economy to a 3 action economy, the reason for doing that is marketing, because players like doing more on their turn. It really, functionally, it's not great for speed. This is why it takes so long. Okay, if you get rid of the minor action, the swift action, the bonus action, and heck, even the reaction, you will speed up your battles significantly more. But of course, Why are you having to do that in the first place? Monsters and player characters doing not enough damage. If you're not reducing hit points each turn significantly, okay, if you're not doing enough damage per turn, and this gets worse as the higher in level you play, you'll find that damage doesn't seem to be high enough to reduce things. Whether it's the players or the monsters, there's just not enough damage being done. And the result is you have more rounds of combat the higher you play. This is quite a common thing to happen. Normally we say, for 5e, between 1 and 3 rounds and you're done. Even with basic D&D, 1 and 3 rounds and you're probably done and you're finished. Although you can miss a lot at low level, so it might be 1 to 5 rounds for basic D&D. And the same thing can be said for version 3 and 4 in terms of 5e. They play very similar in nature. But the thing is, you've got to pump out a lot of damage. Now, modern D&D tends to let players pump out more damage than monsters. So the monsters will go down faster, but the players won't. So if a dungeon master wants to make the battle a bit tougher and a bit more challenging, they have to add in more hit points to their monsters, or get their monsters to do more damage, or give themselves more monsters so they can pump out more damage. More monsters means slower combat. Doing more damage doesn't necessarily slow down combat. But if you give your monsters more hit points so they can keep putting out damage over the rounds, that will certainly cause problems. This leads into player characters and monsters having too many hit points. If you have your players with way too many hit points or your monsters with way too many hit points, you increase the length of time, obviously, before there is a victor or a winner, okay, in terms of reducing them and taking them out of the battle. If all your battle is hit everybody until somebody's reduced to 0 hit points and they're out of play, you kind of created a problem for yourself, okay? So too many hit points, not doing enough damage, these all will slow down the game. So you've got to have there's a fine balance to be had with all of this. The reaction is a modern thing. I do not like reaction. The reaction is kind of like the arrogant uncle that shows up and comes and eats all of your food and drinks all your beer and then leaves again. The reaction interrupts another person's turn. Now, I know why it exists. I understand what the designers were trying to go for. But now someone else that already had their turn gets to do more on somebody else's turn or another person's turn who hasn't actually had a chance to take their turn. Whether that's the dungeon master or another player, it doesn't matter. It's one of the most annoying mechanics that that exists in D&D. And it's a very modern thing. It's been around since version 3. And unfortunately, I don't think it's really playing into speeding up combat. If anything, it tends to drag everything out. Because what happens with a reaction, you cast shield, you stop the incoming attack, you don't take damage, you reduce hit points, you wind up in the fight longer. That's always a problem. You cast counterspell, your spell doesn't work, so somebody doesn't suffer or lose that resource. Hit points do not get reduced. Remember, hit points are a timer, and so that will always affect how long your battles will take. Now, these things that I've talked about in terms of complex rules and how they interact with D&D, these things are things that have been created by the Dungeons & Dragons design team at Wizards of the Coast. Okay, they need to fix this to increase and improve combat speed. Really not you as a player or as a dungeon master. Really, these are things that the designers should have been fixing. Otherwise, a gaming group or a dungeon master, they have to heavily homebrew a game to be able to make it play faster. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't people out there who can do that, because there are, and there are people who do it. But why are you having to do that? Why is Wizards of the Coast not making sure that this has been rectified? Why should it take half an hour or even an hour and a half or 2 hours to play through a battle, because so much of what you've put in place is complicated and time consuming? I don't like it. I'm not a fan of it in the slightest. Thank you, Agile Monk, for the super chat. I want to keep going because I have a couple of other things I have left to say and I don't want to get distracted. So I'm going to keep going. I'm going to talk about player behavior and dungeon master behavior. Okay, please do not switch off. Okay, I still need to say these things, but I want to make it clear to you. I feel like these things are less of an issue, okay, than some of the other stuff that I've talked about. Player behavior. So some people are just slow players, and there's nothing you seem to be able to do about that. They just operate at slower pace. Their brain works a little bit slower. That's nothing against them, okay? They do everything, not just combat, they do everything at a reduced pace. They'll probably be the person who goes last, okay? They're probably the person who takes the longest to make a decision or do something. It's not just combat. So to accommodate them, you have to give them more warning that their turn is coming up. You have to ensure that those people who are slower, okay, get some warning from the dungeon master or from the player who's tracking initiative or tracking the turn order. You need to give them more warning. You also need to ensure that they understand they must pre-plan. Because they are so slow, because they take more time than other people, they must pre-plan what their character will do on their next turn. They can't decide they're going to start that process when it comes to their turn to do something. When it's their opportunity to do something in the battle, they can't go through the process and take everybody on that journey that they go through. They have to do that well and truly in advance. So it's on the person tracking the turn order and it's on the player themselves to make sure this works. Players not prepared before their turn order. Now, when players are not prepared before their turn in combat, this is really an issue of personal time management. This can only be fixed by players. Even if you don't know when your turn is next, you should have, once you finished your turn, you should have started to start planning again for the next turn when it rolls around. You don't know when that's going to be, that's fine. Start thinking, heck, even start rolling dice. I know some dungeon masters don't like that. Personally, I don't think it's an issue. As long as people feel that you're not cheating, why would it be an issue? I'm quite happy for people to have already pre-planned what they're going to do, roll the dice, and they just do it. If they swung their axe or their sword the first time, they're probably going to swing their axe and sword the second time. It's probably not going to be much different from the first time round. All good, wonderful, no problems. So this is really an issue about personal time management, and it can only be fixed by the people who are playing their character, nobody else. So you've got to take responsibility for that sort of stuff. I pre-plan everything I do when I'm playing as a character. I play more than I dungeon master, people. Okay, I will assure you, I've been playing longer than I dungeon master. For the last year and a half, I have not had to dungeon master more than 4 or 5 times during the year. All of the rest has been done by one of my mates in my home group. And I'll take on the responsibility probably for the next couple of years and a few months. And I'll do it. And then I'll take a break again. This is how you keep doing it. So I play characters more. I'm not beating up on players because I actually play more than I dungeon master. All right. People's expectation. I think people's expectation is kind of warped and a bit odd. I think people's expectation is that normal and traditional Dungeons and Dragons combat is always slow. That they've been trained that either what they see or read or what they encounter is that the way that combat operates is it's always a slow, drawn-out process. This is something I hear from people playing as characters. I hear it from dungeon masters all the time, which I suspect is assumed. People assume this because of what they've been trained or taught, okay, or what they've seen. But it's very much about training people into thinking that this is how it works. And it really doesn't work this way. The problem is, I think they haven't encountered enough people who run fast Dungeons and Dragons combat. They actually need to encounter a whole bunch of people who have played games and run games, and they're fast. Combat goes by really quick. And when I mean fast and quick, I mean literally combat started and finished and it all took about 2.5 minutes. Can you imagine having a battle, a major battle, and it took you at low level 2.5 minutes, maybe 5 minutes, not half an hour, not an hour, not 2 hours, but 2.5 minutes. Okay, where the turn time from the time you take your turn and then you take your next turn is about 30 seconds or maybe a minute. And you maybe go through 1 to 2 or 3 rounds of battle, and that's it. And it's all over, and we move on. That can happen. I can assure you. And the day will come, and I will show you what it looks like. You've got to give me a few more months, though. Okay, all right. So I wanted to say that. I wanted to point that out, that this is really a thing that people have been trained in. I think it's very traditional, and it's been normalized. People are not paying attention during the game. If you do not pay attention during the battle, the combat in the game, so you need to ask questions or ask more questions from your dungeon master about what's occurring in the combat or the battle because you weren't paying attention. You got distracted. You started watching cat and dog videos on the computer screen or on your phone or a tablet, or you started text messaging somebody, or you started playing a game on your phone, or you just went off into La La Land, or maybe you were crunching down chips and you just could not hear what was going on because even though the dungeon master's, it's clear that the dungeon master's trying to say something important, the chips were just calling to you. You know what I mean? So you've got to pay attention, particularly in combat, because your turn is going to come up. You're not leading the group in the conversation. Great. So in the role play part, that's cool. You can kind of step back a little bit with terms of social interactions and in terms of world building or even character and development or even exploration and get somebody else to do a lot of that work. You can step back, but with combat, you're definitely going to be part of the equation. You've got to pay attention. This is all about what players are doing. It's not just your dungeon master, but players. You have to pay attention. Another huge thing, and happens to me, when I first started playing, this happened to me a lot. Okay, so don't think that I am excused from this, because I'm not excused from this. Whether you realize it or not, people debating combat tactics or strategies during a battle so that they can win the battle and so that their character doesn't die. These debates can go on a long time, and they slow down battles and they slow down combat. And my experience has been that sometimes those tactical discussions are useful, but only if they are not going round in a circle. If they continue in a circle and they take more than a few seconds and it's more than in one sentence to explain, like, you can 5-foot step and not take an attack of opportunity. But they decide they don't want to do that, and then you go back, no, but you should really take the 5-foot step. You're playing D&D version 3, take the 5-foot step, okay? Because then you don't get an attack of opportunity. And then you have this battle going on. This generally comes down to players needing to let another person play their own character and butt out and stop micromanaging. Now, I'm not getting angry, people, but let's get real. That's what it is. And a lot of us can't help ourselves. We want the battle to go our way. And when we see somebody doing something that's suboptimal, or doing something that we think is a mistake, we want to step in and we wind up getting into this debate. And it becomes an argument and they drag on. Just don't do it. Just leave it alone. If somebody's character dies, make a new character or bring the character back to life. It's there. It's not as bad as you might think. Anyway, the last thing, we got to talk about dungeon master behavior. But this also plays into people playing characters as well. The long narrative description about combat between the player characters and the monsters in a battle. Now, whether it's the player doing it or the dungeon master doing it, this significantly slows down a fight or a combat or battles. Long narrative descriptions. I'm not saying stop including a narrative description in your battle. What I'm saying is keep it short. Keep it short. You don't have to say that much. Now, when I say short, what can you say in a small sentence? I swing my sword at his head and it bounces off his armor if I missed. Okay? I stab with my rapier into his gut and he does so many hit points. Okay? Or I nick him on the side and he does so many hit points. And all it has to be, probably my experience has always been that there are two things that happens with long narrative descriptions. One is the dungeon master decides that they should describe what the player character did rather than the person playing the character describe what they did with their attack when they rolled their dice. Dungeon masters, you're only responsible for dealing with your monsters and your NPCs. Okay, that's the only thing you need to be responsible for. If you want to give a narrative description that's nice and quick and interesting, okay, cool. Do that just for your monsters and your NPCs. Leave the players alone. If they don't want to do that and they don't do that with their character, who gives a shit? It doesn't matter. Either they will take on board that or they won't. You do not need to do that for them. Okay, it's as simple as that. The other thing that I would like to say, this is Dungeon Masters doing this. When it comes to players really caring about describing a narrative aspect of battle, it's usually the killing blow. The monster is reduced to 0 hit points. What do? Or the monster is reduced to 0 hit points. This is the opportunity for the player to say, I lop off their head. They are dead. Or I stab them through the heart. Or I rip out their eyeball. Or, whatever the heck it might be. I reduce them to a pile of ash with my fireball. This is the killing blow is really the only thing that most players care about. The rest of it, it's just nicks and bruises and dents and slips and so forth. It's not quite as important. And remember, there's only going to be about 1 to 3 rounds, hopefully. So it's not like you're going to have to wait that long before you get to have a narrative description anyway. So that's your long narrative description. Avoid the long narrative description in battle. Dungeon Masters not applying monster morale systems. Like, what is a monster morale system? It means that if the creature would logically flee or run away from the battle or surrender, okay, let them do that. They don't have to stay in battle to the very last monster. That drags out combat. Okay, sometimes it's better to let them just run away, and yes, maybe they'll get cut down. Maybe they will flee and they will escape, depending on how fast they move. But monster morale systems used to exist in older D&D. They can be used in modern D&D. You just need to do that. Apply it. It will speed up your gameplay. Okay? Players not knowing why there is a battle with the monster. This is a strange one to put forward, I know, but it does happen a lot. And this happens because the Dungeon Master left out important information. What actually triggered the hostile intent or interaction? Okay? Suddenly, you're walking through a forest and roll initiative. And you're like, why am I rolling initiative? Because there's a battle. Yeah, but what actually triggered the battle? And what they really needed to do was they needed to say that an arrow flew from one of the bushes from a goblin that was hiding there, and it's going to hit you or miss you. They needed to actually give them a little bit more information, and you get that confusion. It happens to me still to this very day, where I have people who do this. And the reason they do that is because of initiative. You roll initiative, and of course the hostile action, the thing that triggered it, winds up at the bottom of the initiative. And you know what I mean? Because we decided that actually we're going to start combat in the first round based off initiative only. Whereas the smartest thing to do with a battle is for a dungeon master to decide who actually triggered the battle in the first place. If the goblin drew their sword and that's what did it, then describe that and we go from there. If they drew their sword and made an attack, let them have their attack, okay? And then roll initiative and go from there. Or go into your turn orders if you've already pre-rolled everything. Pre-rolling initiative is a good idea, people. It really is. But yes, give them the triggering action. The other thing is, and I know why people don't tend to want to do this sometimes, and that is what happens if the players say, they can tell from the dungeon master there's an ambush coming. They know something's going to happen. They know there's going to be a battle, and they figure if I say it fast enough and interrupt the dungeon master, I can get my fireball off. or fire my arrow. You know, they're describing the situation. There's some bushes, you hear some rustling, and you say, I cast Fireball. I cast Fireball. I must get to go first because I said I was casting Fireball. And that's obnoxious as a player, frankly. But it does happen, and heck, I've done it myself. I've seen other people do it. I know it happens, okay? It's usually about, okay, whoever triggered the thing gets to go first, right? So we just need to be reasonable adults about that sort of thing. That's really what it comes down to. But it's always smarter to start with the trigger so people know what's going on and then go into your turns. Okay. Not letting the players know what the armor class of a monster is, because we feel like that's metagaming. But it speeds up gameplay. Like if you actually just let them know what the armor class is, when they roll their dice, okay, you don't have to go through the dungeon master asking a question and the player giving an answer. We go through what is called essentially question and answer tag. Okay, I roll my hit. I get a 15. Does that hit? Dungeon master says, armor class is 14. Yes, you do hit. Then roll damage. Okay, no, I've already pre-rolled my damage. My damage is 7. Okay, cool. But you can see where we're going here. There's that tag back and forth between the dungeon master and the players about who is, have I actually hit the target? Just let them know what the hell the armor class is. Okay, or at least let them know after they have figured out what it is. This will certainly increase the speed. It slows down combat when you start playing question and answer tag around armor class. I'm not suggesting you should do it for everything, but armor class is an important one. Next, continuing a battle when the winner is obvious. Okay, and you're just ticking off the last few hit points on your monster or your NPC before it dies, because it won't run away. It failed the morale, it succeeded on the morale check. It's going to stay there and fight to the very last. Is it really that exciting? Sometimes it's nice to just let monsters and NPCs just die. Or they drop their weapon. They had enough. And if the players gut them, so be it, So that can certainly slow things down. I've done this myself as a dungeon master. I've seen it done by other dungeon masters. We're waiting for the very last hit point to be reduced. Is it really going to be that significant when it seems pretty obvious that the battle has gone one way? People don't always know when to take their next turn, so they're not prepared. If you are the dungeon master who is tracking the turn order or initiative, please have some system in place, whether you show it on your dungeon master screen, what the turn order is, or you have a board on the table if you're playing on a table, or you have a set out order on your digital virtual tabletop so people can see when it's their turn. Please let people have an opportunity to prepare to see when their turn is coming up next. So we're not, whose turn is it next? It's Jeff's turn now. Jeff, take your turn. Okay, and hopefully they're pre-planned, right? Also, video games with real-time combat engines give the impression that tabletop role-playing games, but particularly tabletop Dungeons and Dragons, is slow in comparison. Because a video game with real-time combat engines is always slower than tabletop role-playing games. It can't get away from being any other way. But even if you have a turn-based video game like Baldur's Gate 3, for example, and I had this discussion not so long ago, I think yesterday, where players who've played that game and then they go and play the tabletop role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons, and they realize that combat's really slow in comparison to what they was doing on the video screen. Like, oh dear, do we have to play for 2 hours, 3 hours? Is that normal? Can't we just play for half an hour? But no, it doesn't work that way. So you have a problem where video games come into play, and this is not really the fault of the dungeon master. But I think one of the things you need to do, if you've got people who are coming from video games and never played tabletop Dungeons and Dragons, please let them know that combat plays very differently. It is not the same as the video game. It will take longer. Even if you figure out how to make it run faster than it was before, it will always be longer than a video game. And there's no way of getting around that because a video game does everything. It's got all of that automation to speed up that process. Once you select what you want to do, it does everything for you. It deducts hit points. It calculates damage. It calculates to hit. It lays out areas, area effects. It does everything for you. So you know, it's going to be a different experience. Okay, some important notes. And I only have two. Two things I would like to finish off with. One, I'm honestly not angry about Dungeons and Dragons combat being slow. I'm not angry about people who might have slow combat. Okay, I want to make it clear. What I wanted to do is I wanted to sort of highlight all the things that were kind of working against you. But here's what I want to finish off with. I'm not saying that it is the Dungeon Master or the player's fault that their Dungeons and Dragons combat feels slow. Now, it may feel slow to you. It's not necessarily your fault. Okay? Or that it's actually a long process. Okay? If your battles take half an hour or an hour, okay, I'm not saying it's your fault that that's taking place. What I'm saying is, and what I mean is, it might just be that you run Dungeons and Dragons combat slower than you need to. That maybe you're not utilizing enough strategies to speed up the process to make it feel like it is a high impact, high stress situation that's thrilling. I can assure you that just changing the speed and cadence of a combat battle for D&D will change your feeling about the experience completely. If you sit in a battle and it's all done within 2.5 minutes, you're like, oh my, we play for 2-3 hours. We could have 3 or 4 of these easily, and most of it will be role play and exploration and not combat. Isn't that an experience you would like? So really it comes down to maybe you just running it slower than you really needed to. And if you change a few things and enough things, if you change enough different things, you can actually make the experience of playing a Dungeons and Dragons combat through in a way that you have never seen before. I can assure you it's possible. I want to thank you. I hope that those of you who've been watching and listening, found this useful. Thank you for staying with me. I know there was a lot of information to present. For those of you who thought that I was getting heated and angry, it really wasn't. I just wanted to show you that there's a different way. And really, I'm not showing you, I'm describing to you how you can do it differently and why some of the things might be working against you if you're trying to speed things up, okay? The day will come where I will actually show you how it looks. And that is probably the day that you'll be a bit shocked. Not sure you'll be able to cope, frankly. For some of you, it's going to be a bit of a change in the way you think about things. But anyway, thank you to all my patrons who support me. Thank you to all my subscribers. And really, it's them that make this possible. And till next time, keep rolling those 20s. Okay, that's it for today. Now, I am going to go through the chat fairly quickly. I've spent quite a lot of time talking about this. I really need to respond to those people in chat because I feel like a lot of people have put forward a lot of different things. That probably sort of, they mirror what I'm saying, but I want to deal with anybody who has trouble understanding what I'm saying, okay? Because the intention behind this is to help you improve what you're doing in your game. And I know that this is only my first step. Again, Agile Monk, your super chat, $20 super chat, Agile Monk. Thank you, John, who's also a moderator. Thank you, Fred, for taking on these types of challenging topics. I have been around for 50 years. Yes, they have been around for 50 years. They've existed. If you look back at older versions of the game, they have existed back then as well. So let me go through the chat and just respond to some of the things. I'm not going to respond to everybody. I'm probably going to say just hi to people along the way. But if there's anybody who's struggling, this is your first step. the day is going to come where I will finally show you how I run combat. And I would say it's probably maybe it'll be between 2 or 3 or 6 months from now. I'll do it in a live stream and I will show you how you can do it and make your life so much easier, okay, and get it done. And it's just about whether you decide that's the experience you like or not. Okay, anyway. Thank you. Hello, Fred Huber. Fred Huber is a patron. Thanks for being here. Hello, Phil. Phil Kearney is a designer, by the way, people. He's got his own YouTube channel. So I think you've covered most of those. Garion of Revere. Hello from Yorkshire, England. Welcome. Gosh, it must be very, very early. It'll be early in the morning for you. Jean, hello. Now, we were talking a little bit about this yesterday, I believe. Yeah, like a bullseye target with a focal point for angles. yeah, I guess. Hello, JT. How are you, JT? How are you? It would make sense to do 1 versus 1 initiative. Yeah. Dungeon Master and players. Really, I find that we almost always in the battles that I've run and played in, even Simon, who's dungeon mastering for my group, my home group right now, is using group initiative. So he rolls there's a roll for the monsters and then a roll for the players, and we kind of stick with the same one, and we don't change it, and we just use the same one for the whole session. So if the players get higher than all the players go first, and if the monsters get higher, they go first, and it's done. And yeah, there's not much else to it. Team combat with initiative modifiers and turn order control skills. I'm not quite sure what you mean, but team combat, you mean group initiative. You can group modifiers. Yes, you can do that. We do that. I've done it before. Okay. So one of the things that Fred Huber is just pointing out, some groups pre-roll several initiatives. And yes, I've done that before. And I did that for a long time. And then in the end, I realized that pre-rolling initiative was a good idea. But one of the problems with pre-rolling initiative is I still had to reorder it every single time. And in the end, it didn't really make that much of a difference, frankly. So in the end, I just get people to pre-roll initiative once. And we use the same initiative the whole time. And really, it eliminates... I do that before we even start playing. As soon as John and Simon and Kirsty and Cajun and JP show up, I say roll initiative, and they'll say, "Oh, we're already in a battle." No, just roll initiative, and I put it all into order before we even start the game. And as they roll in, I just add them to the list, and then all I need to do is I just slide my monster in wherever I need to slide it. Okay, and that's it, and it's super simple. Roll and calculate your initiative 6 times. Put them in any order on a notepad. Yeah, I've done this before. DM cuts them out in a grid and rolls a d6 for each of these columns used for combat. I know what you're talking about. Large groups of group initiative. The side goes first. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Again, pre-rolling initiative is great, but honestly, I don't see the value in re-rolling initiative. It's not necessary. Metagaming is normal. In fact, metagaming is actually necessary in some cases. Not all of it. Metagaming is normally just plain wrong, just wrong. No, there's a lot of things that require metagaming. It requires metagaming by the players to understand that the adventure hook is what is supposed to lead them into the adventure. And if they decide not to take the adventure hook, we need them to take the adventure hook. Okay, otherwise they're not going to go on the adventure and everybody goes home and go watch some TV, I guess, or have some sex. Yeah. And you don't have to apologize, Agile Monk John, for being late at all. A droid with action surge is what I'm working on and how to convert it into 5e. So action surge is a feature which creates another problem in that you have another thing you can do on your turn. You've already, in 5e, you've got so much going on as it is. Action surge kind of compounds that problem a little bit. I know it's a great feature. If I was playing a fighter, I would want to be able to have more actions for sure. but it does stretch things out. So unless you have multiple dice with your action surge, it can kind of, really it'll bog things down a lot. Maths will always exist, yes, but frankly, this is why AI and automatic dice rollers are great, and calculators are great. Why not have a calculator? You can add things up on a calculator if you had trouble adding it in your head. Several sets of dice, different colors. Yep. That's exactly what I was mentioning before, Fred, absolutely. How many of those dice float right in the salt water? Ah, yes, okay. Now, I'm not saying you take away all the dice rolling. I'll make it clear. I like rolling dice too. But if you're going to roll dice, you've got to have a better way of doing it. Particularly at high level. I refuse to run high level games without automatic dice rollers for damage. I don't care about the attack roll because I know they'll have more than 120 sided dice, but I refuse to have to deal with them adding up dice at high level. At level 10 upward, it gets really, really bogged down with damage dice. Whether you're dealing with a rogue or a paladin or even a fighter or a monk, it doesn't matter. It gets silly, Transparency, yes. The floating dice to check that your dice are actually balanced. How do we get onto that topic? Yeah, honestly, if you're playing online, they don't really need to roll dice. Exactly, you can just use the automatic dice rollers. Yeah. So epic level D&D is awesome. Epic bard with loving eldritch creature lore to wreck the... Okay, all right. You're auto-correcting. Okay. Hello, Phil. BX separating phases of combat is fast per piece, but overall the round is just as long as 5e after all phases are resolved. So, basic BECME, if you have to kind of tinker with basic BECME to get it to work, just like any version of D&D, in terms of how the rounds play out. I've always found that group initiative works best, but the way that I do it, I'm not going to explain it again, because this is not really about turn order. This is about slow combat and what makes that slow. You can see videos I've done on that before. But I am a huge fan of group initiative, but playing it out a particular way. All right, there's a lot of people making jokes in here. Okay, Phil. Non-proficient players are the slowest variable for sure. And so what you need to do is you need to figure out ways to help them understand how to do that faster. It's really important with new players to explain to them certain things that they can do to make their life easier and your life easier, so everything works a little bit quicker. Yeah, people who wait until it's their turn to think about what they're going to do, that's not a good thing. That's not a good thing. That will not help. The best way to... Now, Phil is designer, so the best way to fix 3 action economy, obviously, make it a 4 action economy. So he's being sarcastic. What he means is, really what you do is you make it a 3 action economy, you make it a 2 action economy. Honestly, I feel like it's the no-brainer. Go with a 2 action economy. It'll work a lot better for you. And you're not losing anything. What you do is you tie, instead of having a bonus action, instead of calling it a bonus action, you call it an action. You get to move and do one thing, and that's it. Okay? Free actions you don't need to worry about. Don't try to count them all up. It's not really that necessary. Do you know what I mean? The DC 20 approach, 4 action points. 4 action points. Good Lord, no. So what Phil is talking about is you have group initiative and you have 4 phases in your initiative. So with the players, what he's describing here, what Phil is describing is what essentially Wally DM does in basic BECME D&D. Your first phase, you move. Everybody moves. Okay, cool. The next thing, all ranged attacks. Anybody who's going to make a ranged attack, they take their turn. Next, anybody who's going to make a melee attack takes their turn. And then casting spells and magic is the last thing that happens. And the players will still forget what they're doing, for sure, absolutely. But I've found that, it can still work pretty well. I'm cold. I have to wear something else, otherwise I'm going to freeze. We're going into winter. Okay. The game I've been testing is similar, simple one, passive action like walking, concentration, one active that requires a dice roll to resolve very fast. Yeah, move and action I feel like is the best way. Two action economy. Go with that. There are way too many reactions in D&D 5e, and also there were in older versions like 4e and version 3. There's too many of them. Timers. My problem with a timer is sometimes those people who need to work slower just freak out. I've used timers before, and sometimes it's not the best approach. Sometimes it's better just to let them go last in the turn order. Do you know what I mean? Or make sure they pre-plan if they're capable of doing that. Sometimes I find there are a few people who can't pre-plan. It's beyond them to comprehend, no matter how long they've been playing. You're listening. Okay, cool. Counterspell is like built in. It's the entire thing. Yeah. We never used to have counterspell. It was never really a thing. Do you know what our counterspell was back in older versions of D&D? Counterspell is I ready to cast magic missile at a spellcaster. If they cast a spell, I disrupt their spell because I hit them with magic missile. That's what our counterspell was. But at least with magic missile, you were reducing somebody's hit points. With counterspell, just nothing happens. Neither side loses resources other than one resource in terms of a spell that you can cast on either side is lost. You're just losing spells that you can cast. You're not reducing the time frame. Remember, the timer in any battle in D&D is hit points. How long can you keep going for the monsters or the players? Yeah. Cypher, yes, we'll come back to Cypher sometime. I'm hoping we'll get to run a game of Cypher in the future. Casting magic in an area should include players casting basically from their personal magic. Okay, I'm not sure where we're going with this, so we're going to leave that alone. I don't know that I'm tense about this. I knew that when I started talking about certain things, I was going to probably get maybe a little bit loud, but I'm not really angry, honestly. I'm not angry. So, hello, Dice Goblin J. How are you? Yeah, so you don't even calculate the damage correctly sometimes. It happens. Not something to worry about too much, if you ask me. Hello, Carl. How are you? I'm not even going to try to pronounce your surname, or maybe I will. Barasek. I think it's Carl Barasek. Hello, Carl Barasek. How are you? Yes. I honestly, if they make a decision and they've already figured out what they're going to do and they pre-roll their dice, it's a huge help. It's a huge help. I can see there's a lot of people cracking jokes in here. Dice apps never cheat. No, there are some dice apps aren't very random. Okay, but honestly, your dice, your physical dice. The problem is the chances are they're not that accurate in terms of rolling randomly anyway. We in my home group we make a current joke. The current joke is that JP's 20-sided dice that he loves rolling, it's a blue dice. It seems to roll an unusually high number of critical hits. It rolls 20s like you wouldn't believe. So if we can get him to roll the dice, we'll get him to roll the dice. We've been trying to get him to throw that dice away for years because we're sure that if he floats in salt water, it'll always pop up to the 20, no matter what. So dice apps can be, inaccurate, but so can physical dice. Most physical dice don't roll very, objectively. They're not very... They're not unbiased. Physical dice aren't necessarily unbiased. So I don't know that you need to worry too much about a dice app. Anyway, let's keep going. I can see there's a lot of comments on this today. John, you're feeling a little bit of annoyance? I think my annoyance is more that people are still talking about this and they haven't figured out how to do it. And but I understand why it keeps happening. It's because designers really they're not leading with their best hand. They know that they could present this a lot easier for people. Oh man, but all the popular streamers say you should add lots of exciting narrative. I know, and isn't this a funny thing? It comes up all the time. That's not adding exciting narrative does not need to be long. This is one of the things that I always have an issue with, and that is narrative is fine, but keep it short. Because ultimately, the only narrative that people really care about is the killing blow. Okay? It's usually just the killing blow. All the other stuff, there's only so many times you can describe how you swing a sword, swing an axe, deflect a blow with a shield, cast a particular fireball, cast a spell. There's only so many times you can describe it and make it sound interesting. The killing blow is really probably the best way to go. Do you know what I mean? It's your monster's at 0 hit points. What would you like to do? How would you like to finish it? And just do that. Just do that one. Carl, I only let my players get distracted if they're watching Fred's videos. Oh, well, that's no, they shouldn't be watching my videos. That's bad. They should be paying attention to the game. Yeah, save the description for the very end. The really important stuff. And crits are actually a good place to reserve for a narrative description. But again, it doesn't have to be long. You can trim that down. Put your narrative in just as you're giving the information across. It can be done in a few words. It's not that hard. 5e says that battles should last up to 4 rounds. That's a great timer to use morale. Yeah, well, that's true, but I would say that most of Phil, I was playtesting, playtesting D&D Next, beta and alpha, and I would say that most battles take between 1 and 3 rounds. When you get beyond level 10, it starts to change a little bit. Unless you change the maths completely, you wind up with really dragged out battles. So you really have to change the way you do everything to work. Otherwise, it becomes laborious. When I try to retreat, the players just want to act like Michael Myers. So they chase after them. So let them finish them off with finish off the monsters. If your monsters run and the players want to keep going, just let them cut them down with an attack of opportunity. You don't have to disengage. Do you know what I mean? For 5e. But in a lot of game mechanics in D&D, if you run, you die. Really, that's really what happens. Pre-roll pulls are very useful, yes. Phil, I keep players in initiative the entire game, both in and out of combat. So the adventure keeps moving forward, avoids dogpiling skill challenges. Yes, dogpiling is another discussion for another day. Combat doesn't change gears. It's very smart. What I do is I just roll initiative once. I use the same initiative, and what I do with initiative, we're getting into initiative again. I'm gonna stop because I know I'll go off in a rant, and I don't think this needs to be a discussion about initiative. Initiative for me is a dinosaur. It's a design dinosaur that it doesn't really help the game that much. It's really to determine turn order, but there's more to speeding up combat than initiative. Byron Lee, you pre-roll your initiative as well. Okay, all right, good to know. If you roll damage with attack, the big damage numbers can symbolize as how aggressive. You just colorize your dice and it's solved. Yep. Team Rocket is blasting off. I don't know what Team Rocket is. You guys are talking to each other. Okay, all right, let me just get through this. Let's see if I can get to the bottom of this chat. Yeah, breaching the gap between video games and the tabletop game is a big one. It really does make it, Yeah. 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 There are always ways that everybody can speed it up. Yeah. Tactical action is its own game, maybe a part, but not a storytelling experience. No, I feel like you can still have a tactical game and still have fast play. You can do both. What do you got here? Fred loves his YouTube and Patreon subscribers and participants. Yes, I do. I do love my people who support me on Patreon and really like the people who jump into the live chats. I know some people don't like live, but I really do. I live for it. It is my favorite thing because I don't have to edit. So I've talked about the Dungeon Master shortage already. There is a podcast that I did on that. I'm not going to discuss that again. If you're struggling to understand that, go and watch that video. That live stream is not hidden. It's all there, and I go into a lot of detail. C is for combat. Okay. All right. I think I'm almost to the bottom. I don't see anything else. I figure out how to get Discord working on my phone. Yeah, voice and video chat. Remember, if you want to talk to me on Discord, I prefer voice and video chat rather than typing, because usually if I'm in voice and video chat on Discord, I'm working already. I'm still working. I'm never stopping. Okay, so what you need to do is you need to talk to me, and I need to see you. Okay, that is the experience I'm much more interested in on Discord. It's the only reason I created the Discord in the first place. Okay, I know there are other things there, but frankly, their importance to me is very, very small. It is there for you to come and chat directly to me face to face over Discord in a voice or video chat. Yeah. Per Sherm, hello, how are you? Yeah, don't lick the smash button. That's bad, people. He means click the like button. Yeah. Do not lick anything. Okay. I think we got a lot of stuff here. I'm at the bottom. I think I'm at the bottom. Okay, I'm not going to go and talk any more about speeding things up or initiative. Instead, we're going to leave it there. I've ended the poll, and hopefully it shows up in the chat because it hasn't. I don't know why. I pressed the poll, and nothing happened. Oh, there we go. Do you think that Dungeons & Dragons combat is slow? Yes, 63%. 22 votes out of all of this. No, 18%. So there's 18% of you who have probably got it figured out. Undecided, 18%. Okay, cool. So for those of you who haven't figured out how to speed it up, the day you see it will be on Wally DM's channel when I finally decide to Dungeon Master in a live game. And I will be using, when it happens, more than likely, my version of 5e, which isn't anything like what you've probably ever experienced. So that will be the day between 3 and 6 months from now. And hopefully between 3 and 6 months, I will be working part-time and I will have a bit more time to do the stuff that I do here on YouTube and Patreon, which means you'll get your stuff a bit faster, which will be good. Anyway, all the best with your battles. I love combat and battles, but I like them quick. Anyway, so thank you to everybody who's been watching and listening. Thank you for taking part in the poll. Huge thank you to all of my subscribers, but particularly my patrons who support me so I can keep doing this sort of thing. It really is, it's great that you do so, and it's become more and more important to me than you can imagine because of the way things change, and it really does help. I want to say a big, huge thank you to those people in chat. Phil, Per Sherm, okay, Byron Lee, I believe Byron Lee is a patron. I'm pretty sure, or certainly he was. I'm pretty sure he is a patron. Jean, Agile Monk, also a patron. Thanks for being here, Agile Monk. Thanks, John. Thanks to Fred Huber for being here. And JT, can't forget JT. I'm probably going to miss somebody out. Carl, thanks, Carl. Dice Goblin J. And yes, if I've missed your name out, was not my intention. I certainly wanted to respond to everybody if I can. But today has been an interesting day, and there's a lot of discussion taking place. So wherever you are in the world, whether it be the morning, the afternoon, or the night, please look after yourself, your family, and your friends. Be nice to your neighbours. Maybe consider speeding up that combat a little bit. There's a few ways you can do it. Okay? And till next time, keep rolling those 20s.